Welcome to episode 1 of Getting Your Priorities Straight, where we discuss topics ranging from your love life to the COVID-19 vaccine. On this episode, we will be discussing the COVID vaccine and where its priorities lie. Getting a bit sassy here. I'm here with my partner, Ray.
Yeah, I'm Ray.
That's Ray. And today we're not talking about our love life.
We're talking about the vaccine.
Yes, sir. We're talking about the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. That rhymes. That's nice. This is grim. And yeah, we're talking about vaccines. What's up with that, Ray?
So for this podcast, we're going to be talking about the COVID-19 vaccine and the priorities of it, in particular, who should be getting the vaccine first. So Gabe will be handling topics that are more large scale, for example, countries, nations, what countries aren't receiving the vaccine, why those countries aren't, and what's happening politically. And I'll be handling more small scale things like local nations, local United States issues of like populations who aren't receiving the vaccine.
Yeah. So a good start on this topic of, large scale vaccine prioritization would be taking a look at COVAX, which is an organization which is made up of other healthcare and scientific organizations, namely WHO. But COVAX, in a general sense, makes the vaccine equitable for countries around the world because governments compete against each other. That's just what happens. Every government is going to want to buy up doses for their own countries, which has already happened and it is causing problems. And COVAX's goal is to stop this, both during this pandemic and future pandemics. And something interesting to just take note of is this is the largest vaccine rollout in world history. So it's not surprising at all that an organization such as COVAX has emerged from this pandemic. But just as there is with anything, there have been problems with this. Bringing vaccines to developing nations, mostly African nations, has been a problem. At the beginning of the pandemic, COVAX was not yet as established and wealthy as other first world nations. And because of this, many first world nations, including France, the United States, England, they bought up all the doses, leaving other countries in the dust, which is very sad. So essentially, the time that it took for COVAX to really get started and get its get its feet moving, was staggered, and this had consequences. So pledges and commitments are taken extremely serious during this pandemic. And what I mean by this is COVAX and other developing nations are putting a lot of pressure on both vaccine manufacturers and wealthy countries to pledge vaccine dose donation. I don't believe any countries have an excess of vaccines. However, because many people just aren't getting vaccinated.
In wealthier countries?
Yeah, many people just aren't getting their vaccines. We are able to provide and donate vaccines to other countries who are doing worse off than we are. And when I say we, yes, I'm talking about the US, but the same thing for France, Germany, the UK, etc. Another thing that has, I guess, impeded on vaccine doses getting to these developing countries is actually what happened in India with COVID-19. A few months ago, actually, it wasn't even that long ago, a lot of us remember seeing all over the news that India was in shambles. And because of the turmoil that was going on in India, they actually shifted their vaccine focus towards themselves. The only reason that this is important is because the Serum Institute of India, which you guessed it, it's in India, many African countries were reliant upon this institute for their vaccine doses. In fact, the Serum Institute of India is the biggest vaccine maker in the world.
Really?
Yes.
I was expecting it to be somewhere like out of United States.
No. It's in India. I have no more to say about that. But all of these things mixed together had consequences, and the consequences of this are, in the end, Africa's overall vaccination rate today is 7.5%, and it is a huge continent. There are countries in Africa, the better countries in Africa in terms of vaccination are around 40%. Europe's overall vaccination rate, which I believe has a more dense population, is 54%. The US is at 68.5% right now. As of October, only 15 of the 54 countries met the vaccination target, which was 10% vaccination rates. And when I say 54 countries, I'm talking about the 54 countries in Africa. So I believe that this is something to talk about. I personally think that it's infuriating that wealthy nations have been able to buy up enough doses of the vaccine to put developing nations so far behind. This should rile us up. This should say something. But I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Do underdeveloped nations have smaller populations, and is there a program in COVAX that you know of that kind of handles out, giving out the vaccine by population? Because I think if we were to do this ethically, COVAX should have split the vaccines by the populations of people, and the people who had the higher population should have got the vaccine first. So it would have been more fair than just having every place buy a vaccine. I think having the idea of everyone buying a vaccine really falls into the ideas of capitalism, and where the people with the most money wins.
So I actually think that it's interesting that you ask those questions, because in fact, when I was writing my 6-page research paper that took way too long for me to do,
Same.
I actually studied a lot about population growth, and it actually turns out the underdeveloped nations actually have populations that are growing faster.
Really?
Yes.
See, the narrative that I'm always told on TV and shit is that, Africa has smaller populations. It's a small village, but yeah, that totally makes sense.
I understand. I do see that in media too, and sometimes when you see like a highly developed city somewhere in Africa, you're like, what? Where's that? You would never assume that it's in Africa. I think because of how the media portrays Africa as an entire continent. But I guess that's a bit off topic. But no, underdeveloped nations actually have populations today that are growing faster, not slower. And yes, COVAX actually, the way that these vaccines have been distributed is that it's been proportional to every country's population. So it hasn't been that if you have a larger population you get more. It's been, I believe it's been one every 1 out of 100 people you would get one dose. And hence why some vaccination targets have been only at 10%. But yeah, population has been put into consideration when distributing vaccines, at least on COVAX's end. So now to sum up my end of the podcast, I think it's important to say that the idea behind COVAX is, generally speaking, a good idea. Transportation is more easily accessible than ever. Population is higher than it's ever been, and to have an organization that specializes in the distribution of vaccines during pandemics or serious disease breakouts is a good idea and a good thing to have. Because another large rollout, another large vaccine rollout, another large cure rollout will be needed in the future. Will that be the near future or the far future? We don't know yet. But I think that it's fair to say that COVAX is overall a good idea, and it's extremely relevant to vaccine prioritization because it's sort of solving, it aims to solve that issue at least. And that's at least what it's trying to do. Make vaccines more equitable.
Okay, so now to get into my little section of the podcast. I said before that I'd be talking about the smaller scale issues and less about countries. So,
Here in the US of A.
what are you, a country hick? So, to go back to what Gabe was saying in the very beginning about COVAX and how, it was kind of a program that made sure everyone got priority, at least countrywide. There isn't really a peacemaker within, social groups of people. So, for example, if you're, a teacher or a student or a healthcare worker or an old person or anyone, you're going to argue that you should get the COVID vaccine first. Obviously you would, because it's something that's new, important, and there's some people who don't want it, but there's a lot of people who do. And unfortunately, socially, we just do not have a peacemaker like we do with...
Unless we're talking about the strategical advisory group of experts.
SAGE!
Woo! SAGE! But they're, as we talked about in EWP 190, the information is not easily presentable to the general public. And it's also not something that's generally easy to find. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I've done a lot of research for papers on COVID, and I've also just been, experiencing this stuff for, 2 years now?
Yeah, almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. And, I've never once seen an official document about,
Until SAGE.
Until SAGE, recently this week, about, prioritization.
And I think that the information is there, and you can read it and you can understand it if you make an effort to, but I don't think that it's common knowledge enough to the point where we really understand it enough to where we could or should, despite the fact that vaccine prioritization has an effect on all of us in our everyday lives and, clearly national politics.
I would argue that it's really not that easy to comprehend, though, because, heck, the paper that we were given in class, it's a green packet, and...
It wasn't chronological.
It wasn't chronological, but it was by SAGE, which isn't a company that I personally haven't heard of. Organization. Shush. Okay. An organization that I personally haven't heard of. Have you heard of SAGE or COVAX?
I have not, although I feel like I should have, and I'm not saying that that's anybody's fault, but a discussion is worthwhile about the lack of discussion in vaccine prioritization.
Yeah, totally. But ultimately, I think it's fair to say that we could kind of blame the media that is giving us our COVID vaccine information, our COVID priority information in our media. And I think the media is also not reporting on people who should be getting the vaccine, at least not on the TV or the news or the media that I'm watching, which could be faulty to myself.
Well, we also have this SAGE report which shows us exactly who is being prioritized. But Ray, that brings you into your next topic.
I think people of color and people who are inmates should be prioritized heavier. To start off with inmates, I think just the nature of jail makes it very hard to follow a lot of issues with social distancing, and a lot of the COVID-19 policies and protocols. You can't really wear a mask. Like, you know how in the school cafeteria, when you're sitting all together, you can't wear a mask. And I've read other news reports and quotes of other prison inmates saying that, they're sitting, elbow to elbow together with people, and they're just not wearing a mask, and you can't, socially distance with your roommate. And it's really unfortunate because it makes jail inmates 4 times more likely to receive COVID in general than, like, the general population. And to add on to that, unfortunateness
It's fine, whatever.
Unfortunateness is, they're more likely to have chronic illnesses, according to the prisonpolicy.org.
Which is a political action committee that's dedicated themselves to end mass incarceration.
So it's just, these people are not receiving COVID policies or COVID prioritization. We actually had to have a judge recently fight to even let them get the vaccine.
In our state, yeah.
In our state.
Only now has it been mandatory for vaccines to be offered to prison inmates.
And that's not even getting into, like, how likely it is easy for them to get it, how easy it is for them to access it. And just December 1st this year, correction officers are losing their jobs because they're now only requiring vaccines. This is really sad, depressing news.
On both ends. Like, and that gets into something that's not even in our ballpark, but, first of all, prison inmates weren't made priority, and only now is there a vaccine mandate. Whether or not you think that should be the case is a different discussion. But only now is there a vaccine mandate, which just says only now is there being any attention drawn to this.
And I don't think these people should receive, like, a death sentence, because that's essentially what they're getting. They're essentially getting a death sentence through COVID. Because they, I don't know, stole a car when they were 17 or something like that. Yeah,
they didn't sign up. Their crime didn't match a death sentence, yet they're being put into a circumstance where that may very well be the case.
So, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on
And also, do you guys remember? I mean, I'm talking to you guys like I'm talking to somebody aside from you, but do you remember when inmates were just being let out in bulk? Like around the beginning of the pandemic, they're just letting inmates out of prison because
I don't remember that, but tell me more.
I really don't have much to say on it, aside from the fact that I remember seeing in the news that prison inmates were being let out of prison because they couldn't socially distance as much, and it was just too high risk for some people.
But that was all the way in the beginning of the pandemic, and I think it's really easy to say that people being poor, unfortunately, sometimes poverty or just circumstances leads to people committing crimes. So I don't know the exact statistic, but I feel like it's a pretty easy guess to say that there's been more people criminalized in the pandemic recently than were, like, let out in the beginning of the pandemic. Time has evolved since then. So are these people even still being socially distant? Probably not. I'm asking you.
We don't know.
We don't know. We
should have found that out, but oh well.
This is all a rhetorical question, but I don't know.
Well, and we did want to have a bit of a debate, Ray.
Oh.
We did want to throw down a little bit.
So on the Sage packet or the Sage paper, we read the group of people who were put on the prioritization list. And group of people who were not put on the prioritization list were people of color.
Yeah, U.S. racial minorities.
Yeah, U.S. racial minorities. And these people really should have been. Not saying they couldn't get the vaccine, but these people are dying at higher rates. They are getting infected more often. And I think that could really fall into a whole conversation about intersectionality in health. But they should have been listed like elderly people because they were more likely to die and be affected. And it's kind of angering that these people weren't put on the list. Gabe, your thoughts?
And this is where I disagree. I don't think that racial minorities should I don't think that any race should have a spot on this list. I think that it should be divided based on different factors, being either poverty, excuse me, or dense living situations. Just because I think that that's a better determining factor. I think that if you're poor, you probably have less access to transportation. If you live in a denser area, you will also be at a higher risk to get infected and die. And unfortunately, these are both factors that United States racial minorities often face, whether that be because of redlining or, that's a big
issue.
that's a big one. That's all that's on my mind right now. But I think that yes, there should be a distinction.
But it shouldn't be off of race.
But it shouldn't be off of race. However, with all that being said, Ray and I just felt that having this debate / conversation on whether racial minorities should be given priority is worthwhile. I feel like I've said that a lot throughout this podcast, but it's what I feel. So I said it. And as we push 20 minutes of our first episode, that's going to conclude our first episode of
Get Your Priorities Straight.
Thanks for that little tune there. On the next episode, we will be discussing the topic of should you dump your girlfriend? Thanks for joining us.
It's blooper time. I don't know.
Do a fair bit of bloopering. I do a fair bit of bloopering. No. God. Jordan Peterson. Alright. Put 12 rules for life down, Ray. Put 12 rules for life down. No Jordan Peterson today. England, Germany, all these
UK.
other UK is like United Kingdom, so it's yeah. Learn your geography, Ray. God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you, Gabe.
Oh my god.
Yes, Ray, I agree. I have something to add on to that.
Go on.
That was actually a really great unrehearsed comment.
Thank
Wow.
you.
That was good.
Communism! Woo! Yeah!
I'm not a communist.
I am.
I'm not. It doesn't work.
Okay, we're not getting into this.
It doesn't work.
No, I'm not getting it.
It doesn't work.
Okay.
Okay. Agree to disagree. This
Yeah.
is how we live in unity.